Good morning. Can I welcome members, invited guests and the public, both here and watching on the webcast, to today's meeting of the Regen Committee. Members of the public may like to follow us on Twitter at London Assembly and take part in the meeting discussion using the hashtag Assembly Regeneration and hashtag Smart City. Our main topic of discussion is digital connectivity and London as a smart city. But first, we have a few short items of formal business to go through before we get to our guests. Please make sure that all your electronic devices are switched to silent mode to avoid any unnecessary interruptions this morning. Item 1, can I start by asking Teresa if there are any apologies that we've received for today's meeting?
I'll just say Assemblymember McCartney's running a bit late.
Thank you. And declarations of interest, can I ask the committee to note the recommendations set out at item 2? And can I ask the Assembly members to declare any other disclosable pecuniary interests and other relevant interests at all? None? Thank you. And item 3, can we note the committee membership terms of reference and standing delegation, please? Noted, hopefully.
Noted, yep.
Thank you. And item 6, the minutes. Can I confirm the minutes of our meeting held on the 6th of March, please?
Great.
Thank you. And summary, item 7, summary list of actions. Can we note the completed and ongoing actions arising from previous meetings of the committee, please?
Noted, Chair.
Thank you. And moving on to the main agenda today, our discussion on digital connectivity and London as a smart city. May I start by welcoming our guests to the meeting and invite them to introduce themselves, briefly being the operative word, please. Starting with Theo, Blackwell, Chief Digital Officer, GLA, please.
Yes, I'm Theo Blackwell. I'm the Chief Digital Officer for London.
That was very, very brief.
So what does that mean?
Go on, say a little bit about what you do and how long you've been here at least. Sorry, I was...
Yeah, so I've been in post 18 months, and my primary responsibility is to develop the Smarter London Together roadmap, which we'll be no doubt discussing today, and to provide better, if you like, digital governance for London.
Thank you. And Sara Kelly, Principal Policy Officer for Digital Connectivity at the GLA, please.
Sara Kelly, Principal Policy Officer Digital Connectivity. I head up the Connected London team. We work with local authorities, providers and all stakeholders on improving the availability of full fibre and mobile in London. Thank
you. And Shashi Verma, Chief Technical Officer and Director of Customer Experience at TfL.
Right, Shashi Verma, I've been at TfL 17 years, the last 3 years as the Chief Technology Officer, and the last year also as Director of Strategy for TfL, and I have responsibility for all things technical in TfL.
And can I ask you, because I was asked this morning by some of my colleagues, were you the man who invented the Oyster card?
Yes, and contactless.
Well, I'm very impressed. Follow that, Councillor Jonathan Glanz. I should declare an interest. Jonathan is an old friend and colleague on the council, and he's the gig economy and broadband champion at Westminster City Council.
Good morning. Well, as you say, a difficult act to follow in terms of that, but what my role is to ensure that businesses and residents get the best connectivity which is available throughout Westminster, more particularly that they get it at affordable prices, that we avoid any issues in relation to digital deprivation.
Thank you very much. Going straight into question 1 and starting with Theo, what is the role of the Smart London Board, please, and Lottie in making London a smart city, and how are you contributing to the delivery of a smarter London together, please?
Thank you for that question, and thank you for the opportunity to address the panel, the committee. The role of the Smart London Board, to answer the first part of the question, is to give further strategic advice and opportunities for engaging the business community and civil society around the Smart London agenda. It was appointed just before I was appointed, and continues its role as it was set up in the previous administration to provide that extra extra help and support and guidance on the sometimes quite thorny issues that arise from the implementation of technology solutions in the city. So far, the Smart London Board has met approximately 6 times. It has advised me and guided me on the development of the roadmap. There have also been opportunities that have arisen from the Smart London Board, most notably engagement in the development of the London Office for Technology and Innovation. Now, the London Office for Technology and Innovation is we plan to launch in June. It's been in development for the last 18 months. It's a collaboration between the Greater London Authority, London councils, and a cohort of digitally leading boroughs. Actually, there's a workshop going on at the moment with borough CIOs in order to develop its work plan. It's a kind of unique institution for London. It will be based at London councils, but slightly arm's length from London councils. It's got a special funding model, part funded by the GLA, part funded by London councils, and then a kind of subscription from participating boroughs, including Westminster. And it aims to do something that we've never really tried to do before, and addressing a real problem, which is building the capabilities of that cohort of councils. So sharing and reusing what works best, digital skills, creating common platforms, and solving those issues that have prevented the scaling of the best digital services before in London. And one of our big challenges as a city is that on the TfL level, Shashi introducing contactless payment, that is, of course, a smart city solution delivered on a London-wide scale. But London is, as we found, a collection, it's 32 different smart cities. And this is something that's almost mainstreamed into the kind of UK political settlement, is that if we try scaling something from one council to another, we come up right against localism. So what do we do to take the advantages of being in a city and get over the disadvantages of that fragmentation? And so Lottie is specifically set up to help scale good ideas together.
So, do you want to add anything? You don't have to.
We're working with Lottie on identifying opportunities for digital connectivity as well.
Okay, and Jonathan, what is your knowledge and experience to date of Lottie, please, and how do you think it will benefit public services in Westminster?
Well, as Theo said, we're happy to work with Lottie, and indeed we're happy to work with anybody that will help us achieve our objectives in Westminster. He's referred to aspects of digital service, and my focus has been on actually the provision of the delivery mechanism as opposed to the product which is delivered over that. And I know that he's working with our colleague Paul Swadler and others in relation to how we can improve our digital offering at Westminster and continue to sort of champion best practice in that respect.
Okay, thank you. And moving back to Theo, what has the renewed Smart London Board contributed so far to the Mayor's plans for London to be a smart city? And could you give a couple of concrete examples, please?
Well, the Smart London Board essentially sits there and advises me and some colleagues on developing a better London-wide approach to things. And I suppose the main point I'd make is that we've pivoted in the view, or updated the view of a smart city from where we were, I think, around 2013, 2014, to essentially make it relevant, I think more relevant to the contemporary debates today. I think when we were considering as a city what a smart city was just after the Olympics, we were thinking perhaps about the challenges of the Olympics. How do we deal with extra tens of thousands of people being moved around the city, and how do we get a greater sense of those big systems of the city and how they integrate together. Today, when people talk about smart cities, they talk about them both in terms of a physical thing, a smart city platform that's evident in perhaps countries in the cities and countries in the Middle East or in China. They think about a smart city in terms of districts, and they think about smart cities in terms of smart city technologies. These are all really, really important, and critical to that, of course, is the provision of fibre. But the danger in that approach, and this is something the Smart London Board has been really helping me think through, is that that suggests a technology-first approach rather than really understanding citizen need. And I think there's something special going on in London, which is we're a global centre of the data economy, if you like, and we're also a global hub for the design economy. And we've got major institutions such as the Government Digital Service here, and obviously universities. And all of these things together, the data and the design, really help us come up with a new conception of what it is to be a smart city. Not so much a noun, but an adjective and an approach. And so the Smart London Board has helped me develop, I think, a new way of thinking about a smart city, one that focuses on 5 main aspects. And I think these five what we call missions are critically important to, I think, any organisation trying to adapt to the digital age. One is we need to focus on design, and design around the citizen, design around the user. Secondly, we need to enhance our capabilities about data sharing. So not just a platform, but how we actually share data, the culture of data sharing, the legal agreements, and so on and so forth. Digital connectivity and how we make the city more connected. Public service digital skills to build our capabilities to understand what is possible from technology to serve our citizens better. And also collaboration, which is where Lottie comes into it. We need a new institution for the digital age, if you like, in order to help us collaborate on projects better. Now, those 5 areas, design, data, connectivity, skills, and collaboration, as I say, are things that could be applied to any large organisation. All of those elements are really, really important to digitally transforming an organisation. And essentially, the Smart London Board has helped us understand that better. Now, there's one thing I'd add about the role of the Smart London Board. We have focused particularly on one area post the publication of the Smarter London Together roadmap, and that is on what we call the New Deal for City Data. And so they are specifically advising me on the City Data Analytics Programme, AI ethics, and our developing approach to a city cybersecurity action plan. So their expertise, I think, is invaluable in helping us understand the dynamics of data and city data, which I think are really quite critical at this time.
Great. Thank you very much. Sara, did you want to add anything? You're on my notes saying I should ask both guests. So.
No, just to reiterate that there are obviously digital connectivity is fundamentally a part of the Smarter London Together roadmap because it is an enabling infrastructure, but not just that. The digital skills part of the Lottie work as well relates to digital infrastructure because we're not going to see the full benefits of enabling full fibre if people don't then do things with it. So our work programmes across Lottie are very fundamentally all tied together, and the Smarter London Together roadmap.
Great, thank you. And I'm passing over now to A.M. Dismal.
Thanks. I'm just going to talk with you about digital connectivity, and obviously we've got an awful long way to go compared to international comparators. And with us, I think the figure we've got here is just 3% have pure fibre all the way through, and compared to Spain, which has got 83% connected to pure fibre, so long way to go. Sorry, my phone's going. Perhaps you could give us an update, Sarah, on progress by the Connected London team in improving connectivity and dealing with not spots.
So you have in front of you 3 different maps, which are from using the latest data set available from the Ofcom's Connected Nations, which is collected by Ofcom, and providers are required to give coverage information to them. And you'll see super fast coverage we have, so that is fibre to the cabinet technology, and we have that coverage at around 97% in London now. Ultra fast coverage, which is a technology that again, fibre to the cabinet, but then uses a coax cable from the cabinet to the home. That's traditionally how cable TV services were delivered. So providers are now using that to deliver a better service, a faster service than fibre to the cabinet. And availability of that is at around 71% in London. And then the latest information we have on full fibre, that coverage is at around 12% in London compared to 8% in the UK. So we're seeing some improvements, some gradual improvements. The work that my team does, as I mentioned, is with local authorities and providers, and we really try to use the tools available to the Mayor to better enable investment into fibre infrastructure in London and address some of the barriers to delivery that providers often talk about. So my team coordinates across all 33 local authorities in London. We have 5 regional working groups, and we meet with them quarterly. We're just under a round of them now. I was in Lewisham yesterday. I'm going to be in Merton tomorrow. The purpose of those regional groups is to share best practice. So what's working really well in Westminster, we get local authorities in similar areas together to talk about what's worked for Westminster, can it work for another local authority, and try and share best practice and knowledge to try and tackle some of those barriers to delivery. And then we also meet with providers to get their views on where they'd like to invest, what they'd like to invest, and try and understand from their perspective the issues that they're facing as well.
So looking at these maps, I suppose it's not surprising that areas around the periphery of London are less well connected, but I think what would surprise a lot of people is to see the extent to which the central activity zone in Westminster, City of London, are not connected. And if we're looking at Westminster as a whole, I don't know if Jonathan wants to comment on this, sort of the Paddington end is reasonably connected, but the Marylebone and South Westminster is not. And if we're looking at Westminster as a good example, what's going on?
Well, it's a very good question, because I think we have to look at the history of how connectivity has been supplied in the central activity zone. And up until comparatively recently, the options which were available to businesses were to have a copper or ADSL connection, or to pay for a lease line. And the lease lines were put in by Openreach and its predecessors and its commercial competitors at very expensive prices. So if you wanted to have the absolute certainty that if you're running a business in the centre of London, that you have sufficient bandwidth in order to do that, you had to pay hundreds or thousands of pounds a month in order to get a lease line. That's been a very lucrative business for the suppliers. So my understanding and analysis is one of the reasons that we haven't had the same kind of general rollout of better quality connectivity is because that has been that source of income has been maintained by the suppliers to the detriment of choice to residents and smaller businesses. So we've really been focusing on those not spots which you highlighted as being there in the middle of Westminster, whether it's Soho, Marylebone, Mayfair, the areas that I represent on the council. We have looked very hard as to how we can resolve that. And there have been a range of solutions as to how that is now being addressed. And I was just saying before that I think probably there is an element of lagging indicator in terms of where we are with that journey, because we now have fibre to the premises being provided to most of the central activity zone via, in some cases, several companies who have filled the vacuum that BT Openreach left behind. And in addition to that, we've also worked with Community Fibre to provide gigabit connectivity to our social housing, and using those the bases that have been created within the social housing building to spread tendrils out to a wider area to improve that connectivity quite significantly. And I think that where that has taken place, they've seen a very good take-up and transformation in terms of the old levels of connectivity, and focus specifically really on the smaller businesses who weren't able to pay the hundreds and thousands of pounds which were being requested for lease lines, but nevertheless, whether they're involved in the creative industries or medicine or the professional services side of things, they are now able to get that, and they have significantly improved their ability to go out to the market in the case of creative industries and to conduct their business generally across the piece. We've seen people move from speeds of a sort of 2 or 3 megabits up to hundreds of megabits, and with the transformation that that's had for their businesses, allowing them to operate in a completely different way.
So are we saying that this green map is out of date?
My understanding is that there are elements of lagging indicator within that. We keep a very detailed map of connectivity within Westminster, and within the areas which are showing white, we now see significant penetration by other providers of FTTP services, and I think there is an element, as I said, of time lag, an element of recognition for those particular providers not being part of the standard process, because as I understand it, if Openreach upgrades something, it gets more or less put onto this pretty quickly. But if the new providers, such as G Networks or Hyperoptic or Relish, put in the same services, there is a slightly more cumbersome process of recognition for the contribution that they're making to the connectivity in the area. Sorry, Theo.
I agree. I think there is a challenge with getting accurate data about this vital service, and it's something that we are keen to address with Ofcom.
Well, the next question is, how are you working with the boroughs about progressing connectivity in the areas? How do you think you do? I mean, I see Camden, where you came from, is looking quite good compared to Westminster, particularly in the conterminous bits where the businesses are probably not that different.
Yeah. So, my take on connectivity is that, remember, the provision so far has supported London to become one of the world's most recognised global tech hubs. What we need to do now is go to the next level, because something new is coming, and that is 5G. And 5G requires a significant investment in full fibre. So, okay for now, but not fit for the future. So we need to put in place a number of very, very strong measures, and that requires us to adopt a new approach. And I'd characterise our approach in a number of ways. Firstly, we've invested in the Connected London team, which for the first time is working with the boroughs really, really closely to do what government calls barrier busting, i.e. learning from best practice in boroughs like Westminster and Camden and others, those that have had more experience with investment, and sharing that right across the board. It's fair to say that not all boroughs see connectivity as their primary responsibility, because the history has been providers have come in, or traditional providers have come in and done things. So not all boroughs have plans around connectivity.
So name and shame. Which don't?
I think in our last estimate, there was something like a third of London's boroughs don't have full plans around connectivity. And about a third of London boroughs don't have digital strategies yet. Those that have, I think, have shown significant changes. So Southwark, for example, is an example of a borough which, having developed which had a real problem with connectivity in the Rotherhithe Peninsula, has developed a digital strategy and totally changed the nature of provision in the area over the last 18 months. So it's quite a quick turnaround if a borough really focuses on things. And I think from my experience in Camden, I mean, I was sort of cabinet member for finance, and I was often approached by connectivity providers, and it sounded great. Yeah, all we have to do is use our authority and we can boost connectivity. But actually it's quite a hard thing for a borough to do if you think about it. You've got to, in order to facilitate the appropriate digs, you often have to deal with the housing department, the highways department, legal, other bits of property, economic development. And actually what it takes is not a junior officer, but actually senior leadership in order to make it happen. And where boroughs have really made a difference is those that have committed senior leadership to this. And that's what we're trying to put across to other boroughs in London. So Connected London team does that. Planning policy is another major tool, and we have argued for quite significant upgrade in our provisions in the draft London plan, currently with the planning inspector, including the ask that boroughs are required to have their own digital strategies around connectivity, and a number of other provisions. And I think there's also a real role, which is partly us, partly TfL, and the boroughs themselves, which is the public service estate is going to be vitally important for the rollout of connectivity. So how we mobilise that estate, TfL's tunnels, the public buildings surrounding tube stations, the public sector estate can basically act as almost uniquely in the world a kind of hub for that connectivity, which can be a total game changer for this city. So TfL's work and our associated work with TfL is going to be quite critical to all of those things.
So going back to the question I asked about naming and shaming, I see you'll name and praise, but you didn't name and shame. In relation to boroughs that you would shame if you were prepared to do so, how do you actually relate to them? Because if they've got no digital strategy or digital office or whatever, how can you spread good practice if there's no one to engage with?
Okay, on a practice side, I'll turn to Sara on that. But, yeah. I mean, we have started conversations with London councils around this to get that senior level visibility around the importance of connectivity. And, of course, we spend quite a considerable amount of time and effort going from region to region, identifying the right people to talk to.
Mm-hmm. So my team and I, we maintain a up-to-date contact information for every local authority to make sure we've got the right person that we're speaking to. We also run a number of initiatives that we hope are useful to local authorities. So, for instance, we run training on how to use standardised agreements. We've run a training on the standardised way leave agreement. And we will be running one on our template mobile agreement that we're currently developing. We also organise workshops around key issues, so 5G, for instance, and then also under the previous, when there was funding available from the Department for Digital Culture and Media Sport, we brought everybody together to talk about what that was about and what were the possibilities with that funding. So we've got, a number of tools in the kit that we can sort of lend to boroughs and hopefully provide useful things for them.
Okay, well, through you, Chair, I think it might be helpful if we'd had a list of the ones that were not complying with a digital strategy, so maybe we could give them a bit of a push from our end.
Are you happy to write to us on that, Theo?
Yes, yes, I am. I mean, there'll be a number of caveats because it's not just boroughs that don't want to do things. It will be things like transition of officers and things like that. The point is that it's not a consistent picture. I'd say there's a number of boroughs we can't contact who would have clearly not expressed an interest are extremely limited.
If you want to give, well, it might be easier, Chair, if we get a snapshot of every borough where they are at in the process.
Yeah, we can do that. Could I just say, I mean, a lot of this debate, because it's framed often as barrier busting, has put the burden on boroughs. It is also, as Councillor Glanz has suggested, quite a complex environment in terms of new providers coming onto the scene. And there are changing regulations. The communications code came in, which, in a sense of regulations attempting to codify and provide clarity, sometimes provide the opposite, and are subject to further legal definition, which has given rise to an amount of litigation. So those authorities attempting to do things might often come across a legal letter from one of the providers. So this is a complex utility field here.
Okay, well,
Andrew, I think Naveen wants to just quickly come in on the first two questions you've asked, and then you'll go back to your third question,
okay,
if you wouldn't mind.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I want to pick up issue about not spots areas. A report that this committee published 2 years ago, roughly, I think it was June 2017, in its finding it stated that the capital is poorly served, suffering from not spots and digital deserts in areas like Rotherham in Suffolk, so pretty much in this area. It's nearly 2 years since we published the report and recommendations. Are you able to tell us whether there is any improvement in tackling not spot areas right across London? Because that is the worst end of connectivity. So else we can talk about 4G, 5G, fiber to premises and so on. The fundamental requirement of having some connectivity is so critical. So can you give us an update whether there is any improvement and what kind of areas does it cover? Thank you.
Sure. So I can speak to what we are doing now, what has been done and what is going to be done shortly to tackle not spots specifically. We've been working with local authorities, and local authorities have been leading, like Westminster and Southwark, to identify what assets they own, what housing stock, where it's located, and match it up with maps that we have available on current levels of provision, so that if a housing stock is located in a really poorly served area, that asset becomes a key tool that we can use to better provide for the surrounding area. So if you, as a local authority, get fibre served to that housing stock that is in a poorly served area, not only does the housing stock get improved connectivity, but the surrounding area becomes more commercially viable for a provider to go to. So really utilising existing assets from a local authority's perspective is a key tool, and we've seen many do that. So Councillor Glanz is a great example of what's being done in Westminster. Southwark are doing this as well. Almost all local authorities are now working very closely with providers to understand and develop a master way leaves, so that all their housing stock can become drivers for improving availability in poorly served areas. So we're doing that now, but then also working with TfL, and Shashi will talk more about the TfL Connected London Network, but we've been working on developing plans with local authorities to use grant funding to serve some of their areas and some buildings where they're having services delivered with full fibre connectivity. That again will also greater incentivise commercial providers to serve surrounding areas. and we are now working with almost 20 boroughs on that project. But that will... Is it... Should we go to Shashi now?
We've got a couple more questions,
Right, okay,
if you wouldn't
sure.
mind. Andrew?
Yeah, well, if that's the 20, presumably the other 13 are the
Not quite. I can see where you're going. No, it's where we've been able to dedicate investment so far. So, we are very hopeful that further investment will go into the remaining area of London that hasn't had that. But the tube network is quite critical for that. So you can surmise from that where the challenges are.
And well, last question from me for the time being, to Jonathan. I mean, you're obviously working very closely with City Hall. Is there any practical help that the council would like to see from the mayor that you're not getting at the moment, and indeed other boroughs not getting at the moment?
Most of the things that we're doing either relate to our own powers or our ability to work with other stakeholders. We've heard reference to the wayleaves, and Westminster has entered into the standardised wayleave for all of its properties throughout the city, but also has worked with the large landowners that we have, representing big chunks of the central area, and that's something where it's not been easy because the Grosvenor estates have got their lawyers, and the De Walden estate have got their lawyers, and the Crown estate have got their lawyers, but we have managed to get to a point where the wayleave agreement has been accepted, which has really enabled large areas to be dealt with more quickly and more easily than dealing with individual negotiations every time somebody wants to put some fibre in. If there was any way that methodology could be further extended through the Mayor's influence, through the functional bodies of the GLA, that I think would also be appreciated, because clearly there are other property owners that we would like to continue to work with, and I'm not certain how far that has gone, but I'm sure it's something that Theo's been working on. But we would be very happy to work with other owners who are either directly or under the influence of the Mayor to continue that, to spread things out as far and as fast as we can.
I think the property sector has really come quite far, even in the time that I've been at City Hall, to realise the new demands of connected workplaces and spaces. So that the industry is changing and being more receptive. But I think I'm right in saying that Westminster sort of benefits from essentially a small number of large landowners. That is not replicated in benefits in terms of connectivity, but that's not replicated across areas of London. So when we're dealing with many smaller landowners, that provides a real challenge, and really the authority of the Mayor, and particularly the local council that has most connection with those landowners, is critically important. Hence the work we are doing with boroughs to ensure that that's happening.
Okay. Thank you. Joanne?
Yeah, but I want to come back to the issue of 5G, if I can.
Yeah.
I think we're expecting it to start rolling out later this year. Is that likely? Are we going to be able to roll it out efficiently? And what are the major challenges that you see? Perhaps I can start with Theo.
So just on a strategy, on the strategic level, 5G is coming. A number of providers have been in contact with us and are launching their plans imminently. So we will begin to see it. And the benefits of 5G are obviously, people talk about faster speeds, but really it's going to be a question of what people call use cases. How is it deployed in industry? How is it deployed in the public sector? And some of those are still being worked out. And so that will be a key factor in its demand of what you're going to use it for. And as you imagine that, if you can think back to the days of 3G and moving from 3G to 4G, people knew that there'd be more of a peer-to-peer economy, but they couldn't imagine Uber and that and other providers. So that came about. So what kind of industry there'll be in a 5G economy is yet to be seen, but we know that there'll be a sort of substantial uplift. In terms of the city, 5G will require a significant amount of fibre, which is why this is even more critical work, and it will also require the placement of hundreds of thousands of small cell technologies on things like buildings and lampposts. And so the work we're doing here with the Smart Cities team, funded by the European Commission and work with about 80 European cities, is how we can transform what the Commission charmingly calls the humble lamppost into something that will effectively retrofit the city for 5G technologies in the future, and not just a lamppost using having a 5G functionality, but things like air quality sensors, electric vehicle charging points, and a number of other functions. So how we use that city asset, which is owned by TfL, the Met Police and the councils, how we use that collectively to roll out essentially smart city technology, including 5G, will be really critical. And we're, in a sense, leading the way in Europe on this. And our team here have delivered, a significant amount of progress on that as that sort of eventually a leading pilot project for the European Commission, and creating a business model that we can explore with the city.
Can I ask, are there any special skills needed to be a 5G technician, and do you have the skills, or is that a workforce issue? That
it underlines the critical importance for digital skills in London, without a doubt. Okay. So our investment in that, the Mayor's Digital Talent Programme, and the investments that we'll be doing through the skills budget are really, really important.
I understand that it's estimated that about £2 billion worth of private sector investment is going to be needed. For this.
Fibre,
Yeah, is that...
5G about 4.7 billion,
okay.
Yeah.
And do you get the sense that the private sector is willing to invest in that, or are the barriers to that because the cost might be off-putting for many people?
The market, I think, is in a much different place than it was 4 or 5 years ago, and the council plans may well have a view of this from a Westminster perspective.
Yes, I mean, by way of an update, I mean, we have entered into a contract already in relation to all of our street furniture with a company to provide initially better 4G, but also 5G as it rolls out. That's something which means that each of those lampposts, by definition, have got an electricity supply, but we're also been ensuring that the fibre backhaul, which is the other end of the equation, which is required to make 5G work, is also part of that equation. Interestingly, and a comment on one of the complexities of trying to deliver on this, that contract, which we entered into after the usual sort of processes were followed, has been challenged by BT on the basis that we are preventing competition on the individual lampposts, and I think this will, this will be a recurring theme as other boroughs approach this, and I think that the case will be an interesting one to watch as to how we're able to resolve that with BT, because clearly, had it not been for that case, the investment would already be being made, but with the uncertainty that's created, it's created a reticence in proceeding with the costs to which you referred, because they are substantial, and I hope that won't prevent a rollout across the city in a broader sense.
So the public sector is holding the assets, really, that private sector needs?
Well, it's not. Well, the lampposts are an obvious example, but of course, if each building could have cell or more cells put on it, and provided that they have the ability to communicate. I think it was described by one of the teams, they need to be sort of above the height of a double-decker bus in order to be effective. And it's interesting if you think about where they might then go, whether it's lampposts or other parts of signage or on buildings themselves. But as Theo said, I mean, we're looking at hundreds of these and thousands, really, in order to provide the full connectivity that, that 5G would offer. Still a work in progress from our
and it's worth underlining that point, that there is, you know, an inherent connection between the provision of fibre and 5G. It's not like sometimes you hear from people, it's like, oh, we don't have to worry about digging up the road because 5G will be here. It's just not the case. The two are inexorably linked.
One of the game changers is going to be TfL and the ability to use the underground and train network to lay cable. Do you want to tell us a little bit about that, and can you provide an update at what stage you are in your digital programme?
So we've been working on a series of interconnected projects to deliver all kinds of connectivity in the underground. The one that is really time critical and safety critical for us is the delivery of the emergency services network for the Home Office. And that's about the delivery of a new radio system to be used by the police and fire brigade and other emergency services. So that project has been in development for many years. It is now being progressed. Connected to that is also the delivery of mobile connectivity into the underground. And that's, today it's 4G. And it's 4G today only because 4G technology is mature, and it could become 5G when 5G technology becomes more mature. We wouldn't put anything into the tunnels that is not mature as a technology, because it's quite a difficult environment in which to work anyway, and it's not the place to go and experiment with new technology. So the project to do ESN has been has been set by all kinds of difficulties which the Home Office have been dealing with nationally, and we've been caught up in that. So our project has stopped and started a few times. It's right now sort of progressing, but at a very slow pace. But we have agreement from the Home Office to try and align the work that we're doing for the emergency services network with the delivery of the mobile connectivity. And that's all being combined right now into a major project on which we will go to market with a tender for a concession, a concessionaire to come in and build out the remainder of the technology. So we expect to be in the market fairly soon. I can't give you a date yet because there is a controlled procurement process and the date has to be announced through that procurement process, not here. But we will be in the market fairly soon to procure that concession. And that will mean that the Home Office project to do the ESN will progress. But alongside that, the work to bring mobile connectivity into the tube will also progress. And alongside that, the laying of new fibre into the underground to provide connectivity wherever the tube goes is also going to be provided as part of that. Now, what the tube provides is a relatively sort of large tunnel to lay fibre in. It's not the easiest environment, I have to say, but equally it's not like digging up the roads. So the idea is to provide fibre connectivity through the tube. That, of course, is not enough because you need fibre connectivity to the end point. And the idea is that this concession company will then work with other fibre providers, or indeed, if they have a fibre presence in London themselves, then make that fibre available for others to provide connectivity to homes, businesses, for 5G facilities, or whatever else is needed.
Okay, so at that point, you should get a host of other providers that can come in because the cost of investment is not as great.
Well, even more, our work with the boroughs, starting with the central London boroughs, but also the ones in the northeast and the west, identifying those public buildings near to the tube stations lowers the cost for investment even more, because we're essentially making public buildings into sort of fibre hubs, extending them into communities, lowering that cost of investment, essentially making that money that we need, the 2.5 billion for investment by 2025, go further. So TfL and other public assets are actually really, really critical to this.
Okay, thank you.
Great. Can I welcome the London South Bank University journalist students, and I'm not sure if you'll get a story out this morning, but good luck. And Andrew, you had a question?
Yes. First of all, I just want to say that we've seen this dog in a manger approach by BT before, and it's not very helpful. But the point I wanted to probably ask Theo is we looked at TfL, but south of the river, if I may venture across the river, a lot of the network is network rail. And how are we relating to Network Rail over there? A pretty widespread coverage south of the river where the tube is far less.
It's an obvious point. So provision on TfL's network will be sort of extended as far as the tube goes in South London. I think we've connected up to, we've planned to connect up to Brixton, isn't that right?
Yes.
That's right. And, you know, discussions will be had with Network Rail in order to do the same. It's just it will have to take place at a slower pace. Sarah, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, so I think it's certainly our intention to work, and I think it will be in the concessionaire's interest to work with anybody with existing assets in the ground to reduce the cost to delivery to presences across the capital, really, and that will be, Network Rail will be a key partner that they will be looking to work with.
And other utilities.
And other utilities, yeah.
So,
companies.
yeah, I mean, that sort of will be, what have you been able to do so far with Network Rail to get them engaged?
Well, I mean, I think this is, you know, we've made progress on what we have done so far. We haven't made progress with Network Rail so far.
Yeah.
But that's because I think pretty much where we are in the stage of rolling this out. It is a crucial partner in this.
Yeah.
But Shashi might want to add to this.
Well, I mean, there's quite a difficult job to get this into the underground itself. And the advantage that the underground offers is a tunnel. Network Rail offers a different advantage, which is that they have right-of-way at the surface level. But honestly, laying cable under the street is not impossible. So once you're above ground, the advantage that you get from the right-of-way along the Network Rail tracks is diminished by the fact that there are alternatives available. That's not true in central London, where laying cable is genuinely difficult. Digging up the street is difficult, well, more difficult than it is elsewhere. And that's why laying fibre through the tube tunnels provides an alternative. The other thing that it does, which I think is quite important to recognize here, is that one of the things that the city needs, or in any economy needs, is not just fibre or not just telecommunications, but diversity of telecommunications, so that if there is a problem with one set of lines, another set of lines is available. And that is fundamentally what the tube offers. It's a completely diverse circuit. You can take a digger and dig through the street and cut through a fibre bundle, and that can bring a lack of connectivity to whoever is connected through that fibre. And it does happen, unfortunately, from time to time. But the idea that you would do that and disrupt the fibre in the underground at the same time is very, very remote. And so I think that's what we're offering here.
You've talked about tube tunnels. I mean, I don't know what percentage of the tube is not actually underground, but it's quite a high percentage.
Well, I mean, it's about 40% of the tube is underground.
So
it happens to be
60% isn't.
Yeah, it happens to be the area where laying fibre is the most difficult. So that's essentially why we're focusing so much on the underground tunnels.
And going back to your answer on Network Rail, are you effectively saying it's easier to dig up the road than when it's next to the rail line?
Well, I mean, it's not easy to dig up the roads, and it's not easy to lay fibre next to the railway either. There are difficulties with both. And eventually the market will have to figure out whether it's easier to work with Network Rail or it's easier to dig up the roads. I mean, to an extent, we can only help. It's eventually for the providers to figure out where it's easiest for them to lay fibre.
We can probably guess the answer to that.
It's also worth saying that boroughs themselves have kind of hidden assets. Sutton and Hackney, Waltham Forest, I think, they've all commissioned studies to find out what the suitability of their buildings are and also what other assets they can bring into play in order to encourage investment. So Hackney's CCTV network, which it installed 10, 15 years ago, is actually being used and deployed as part of the package of their partnership with investors, because essentially they've got, I think, over 80 kilometres of dark fibre to put into place. So things that can be used for connectivity that weren't necessarily installed for that purpose are actually things that can be used as part of a wider negotiation. Not all boroughs know what they have. So our job is also to spread the good practice of those boroughs who've really made those first steps to say, well, what do we have, not just buildings, but our own hidden networks, and bring them into play.
Okay, moving on to the London plan, Naveen.
Yeah, I want to raise issues about the new draft London plan changes that we need to achieve, particularly in reference to fibre connection to the premises. The policy S16 touches upon 4 key issues. One is on building exchanges to achieve greater connectivity. Talks about adequacy of ducting space. Then it refers to mitigating measures, and then well-designed public realm facilities for mobile infrastructure, etc. Only in justification 962 on London's capability, it refers to limited availability of fibre and the speeds in London. Do you think that the policy should actually be strengthened to require new development proposals to have fibre to the premises?
So I think you'll be happy to hear we have done. The version that you've read there was prior to the minor suggested changes. The version with the minor suggested changes calls for full fibre connectivity for all new developments.
For all new developments. Okay, that's extremely useful to have. Very, very important, because if you're serious about treating digital connectivity as the fourth utility, that's the right approach. How will this be, the policies that will come in place, how would that be implemented, enforced, and monitored overall?
So I think we will be producing guidance to go alongside this policy that will give local authority officers the necessary information that they need to have those informed discussions with developers. I think in practice, developers, when they come to the planning stage, will have to submit some evidence either in a utility plan or by way of agreement from providers that will demonstrate that they've considered the connectivity of their new development. It's in line with national planning policy framework. It's also in line with government intentions to introduce regulation eventually. So we think developers are going to be compliant with it, and the guidance that we're offering will hopefully help with that as well.
Will this change, fundamental change or addition that you mentioned, will it be part of the S16 policy, or is it another standalone policy?
It's that policy, yes. It's been revised. I'm sorry if you haven't got the
No, I
the
haven't,
latest,
unfortunately.
but we can we'll send that through.
Yeah. Question is, can you not add in justification that this requirement for new premises be actually, proposals be submitted at planning level when you have a design and access statement where you're required to provide detailed sort of proposals as part of the scheme. So when you talk about the integrity of structure and the fire safety and so on, this could be part of a requirement as part of the application in design and access statement. That would then make sure that right at the designs, at planning stage, it gets scrutinized by the planners as part of the essential requirement. This is something I think would be tremendously useful, and it will have legal bite to deliver what we are after.
Well, I'll discuss with the London Plan colleagues and see what's possible, but that sounds
I'll be very
sensible.
happy to contribute and have a dialogue about this.
Thank
But
you.
we still have a window of opportunity with examination in public taking place in this very room.
Thank you.
I think what I'd add having spent about 8 years on a planning committee in Camden, that and Councillor Glanz may well want to add to this, is this approach, if accepted, introduces a real step change in connectivity.
Absolutely.
It just puts it on the agenda.
Yeah.
So the democratic process can now really get their teeth into connectivity and use that in discussion on major developments and smaller developments as well. It's really, really important. And I think, you know, our job as well, working with London councils, is to work with councillors so that they are armed with the right questions as well.
Jonathan, are you content with the package within the new draft London plan that we talked about, or could it be further enhanced or made stronger to deliver the connectivity we're talking about?
Well, we'd certainly welcome the obligation being put on the developers to ensure that their buildings are fit for purpose, really, because, as you quite rightly said, connectivity is the fourth utility. I don't think anybody would come along to offer a building without water, without electricity, without other connections, and I think the expectation that they will do that, I hope, is pushing at an open door in terms of the realisation by developers that they will not be able to really market their buildings in a meaningful way without connectivity. It is now, I think, accepted that when people go to rent a property particularly, they will ask the question, what is the connectivity like? When people go into estate agents now, what is the connectivity like? Because people don't want to go back if they've had elsewhere, either in the world or elsewhere within the UK, the ability to be able to have effectively unlimited connectivity. They don't want to go back to a situation where that isn't the case. So I think through a combination of the changes in the plan and market forces, we will see those two things coming together to ensure that we really do get FTTP on every new build throughout the city.
Okay. One last question on this topic is that whilst we see some we see real step change through the new draft London plan with connectivity issues. Something else that can be done outside the London plan as part of providing leadership in the area, and that's where the question is, what does the GLA do in its broader regeneration program to promote better connectivity? Is there a requirement for fibre to the premises in GLA regeneration programs?
So my team have been meeting recently with all of our different housing, regional housing teams to talk to them about this upcoming London plan policy, so that any new schemes or projects will require full fibre connectivity to any new housing. So certainly we're asking any new developments now to comply with the future London, with the upcoming London plan, and that has all in principle been agreed. So yes, I think we're doing that through our housing team.
So will you be closely, or are you already closely working with a whole range of agencies, in a sense, within public sector where GLA certainly has influence as well as stake? For example, there's a whole host of land and properties which are being redeveloped, etc. Like TfL has a large property portfolio. You got I'm not sure how much of Fire Authority premises or assets are left which are being redeveloped. And NHS, for example, okay, it's not within GLA limit, but again, they are releasing quite a lot of land, etc., where we can and we directly influence. And housing zones, for example, where large programs are coming through for housing, like you mentioned, social housing and so on. So is this something you're doing it as part of strategy to ensure that we do have FTTP in those new developments?
Yeah, we work with all internally in our teams. We do a lot of work to make sure that everybody's aware of our programme and the Mayor's priorities in terms of what the new London Plan policy is going to be. So we work across our infrastructure teams, the regeneration team, the creative enterprise zone teams, the housing teams. We talk about full fibre a lot.
Yeah, my only concern would be that the new changes, affected changes, will only be materially effective, legally effective, once the plan is adopted, which will be another year and a half. I don't know the time frame, but something in that region. In the meantime, I think, therefore, we got to be even more focused to make sure that whilst it is not a legal requirement under planning laws, that is still provided or part of the scheme that is coming through.
For sure, and I think a big part of our role is demonstrating the benefits of it as well, so that people want to, and they're not just required to, but they want to invest in full fibre, and demonstrating that, you know, a building, as Councillor Glanz said, people are not going to want to be there if there is no full fibre. So we do a lot of work with the property industry to talk about that and highlight examples of best practice as well.
I think there's there's real opportunity in London in the sense of, like, you think about the developments that are going to happen over the next 20 years. Some of them very, very significant. Royal Docks, Old Oak Common, Rotherhithe Canada Water, which is now a very significant holding for British Land. We were recently down in Rotherhithe Canada Water with British Land, and their person who was appointed to look at connectivity and smart technology. The kind of infrastructure that will be put into these new developments will be of a completely different order to developments that citizens today consider to be new, such as King's Cross, which got planning permission in 2007, a year before the invention of the smartphone. So what we are doing when we meet with connectivity providers is we're also telling the story of London about where these developments are, and working with them to make sure that there is the proper connection with the private development sector, with not just connectivity providers but also the providers of new smart technologies, because London not being just one smart city but many, these 40 areas, opportunity areas of growth in London will be extremely significant.
One last comment. In our report from 2 years ago, I'd quite like you to please go back to it and have a look at it. If I'm not mistaken, there was a very clear recommendation related to the London plan changes, that something along the lines of boroughs being required to prepare their own infrastructure plans, local infrastructure plans with reference to the digital connectivity. I think that again, would work very well with how overall you're working with the boroughs, and that will strengthen your own kind of capacity and requirements from boroughs. Sure. So if you can please have a look at that and come back to us.
Absolutely. And part of our work through the TfL and the Connected London Network in developing the plans to how we're going to use the grant funding to connect up various local authority properties, we are also developing what we're calling at the moment a pro forma, which is effectively a digital infrastructure strategy, where it sets out clearly who are the key contacts, what are the key processes, are there any key stakeholders that need to be consulted as part of delivery. So we're doing that for every local authority that's involved with the Connected London Network, but then also using that template we're developing there to work with the other local authorities not involved with the Connected London Network, to the TfL Connected London Network, to hopefully get them to adopt a similar process as well, so we can develop this catalogue of digital infrastructure strategies from across London.
Thank you. Thanks.
Thank you very much. And finishing off, final 3 questions from AM Arbour.
It will be more than 3 questions, because some very interesting things have emerged from this. First question I'd like to ask is about future-proofing. I don't know when people first started talking about 5G, but it seems to me to be months ago rather than years ago. I'm very struck by the analogy which Theo has given about King's Cross and smartphones. Given the rapidity of change, are you sure that all your proposed plans for 5G won't simply become redundant because something is going to overtake it and you're going to make this vast investment that is really something for you all, may turn out not to be a smart investment at all? So, you know.
I think the approach that we're taking is absolutely vital for the city, which is providing effectively the infrastructure. We don't know quite what will come with 5G, but we know that it will require fibre. And the next generation beyond 5G, which some people talk about even now, 6G, that will still require, I think, a fibre infrastructure there. So this has now become, as it, you know, someone mentioned just before, Jonathan mentioned, it's just the fourth utility for London. That's where technological progress has taken us, and that's our challenge to meet. London, I think, if you're thinking about future-proofing, we're not placing a bet. If you think about the usefulness that comes from technology, London is so big and has such diverse specialisms. We're not placing a bet on one application of that technology or another in our digital economy. It has the application of technologies to London, to growth and business, come from many, many specialisms. I think the GLA did a study back in 2014, said there were 50 science and technology hubs in London. I think that would be at least double or triple now, just because of the pace of change. So it's not one bet that comes from this. It's many, many different functions that we can offer our citizens and indeed the world.
Are you happy that TfL is future-proofed?
So there are two different things that we're doing. One is we're putting equipment in the tunnels, and then we're putting switching equipment outside the tunnels to enable 4G and fiber connectivity. Now the tunnels are the difficult environment where once you lay cable, you don't want to go back in there frequently. And everything that we have seen about 5G so far is that the sort of cabling that we're putting into the tunnels will be adequate for both 4G and 5G. So in terms of future-proofing and putting provision in that is resilient to change, the difficult environment is getting that future-proof solution. Where the 5G solution is not yet stable is in all the switching equipment. That is where technology is rapidly evolving, and we haven't seen the end of that evolution of technology. But that's not going to be in the tunnels. It's still going to be in difficult environments, but it's not going to be in the tunnels. And that's where, as I said, we don't want to experiment with technology, but we want to provide the space, the power, the cooling, and things of that kind that will allow operators of that technology to switch from 4G to 5G or indeed anything in the future at a relatively low cost. Now, I say that because we don't know yet what the nature of this switching equipment on 5G is going to be. And so all we can do is to make sure that we're putting in the most resilient technology that can withstand the change of technology as it comes along. So are we absolutely guaranteed to be completely future-proof? No, because we don't know what that future evolution is going to be. But we have taken all the reasonable steps that one could possibly take to become resilient.
Yes. I mean, the only obvious thing, I'm very interested in your assets here. Of course, one obvious piece of future-proofing you got wrong in this is the Elizabeth line. But the only thing that I could see which is present here is infinite, is to say that there has to be sufficient capacity within the ducts that you put in for with fibre or something else, which is manifestly true. I recall when I was responsible for this area in my borough, we wanted to use the equipment assets which the borough owned, like lampposts. We found that we'd let some of the lampposts already to somebody else.
Yeah.
And we couldn't get hold of it. What makes you think that the 80,000 street furniture assets that you've got are available to you? or indeed are freely available, however many Westminster has that they own, are freely available to you, and somebody hasn't already preempted them and can in effect blackmail you into buying them out.
That's interesting, because we were early adopters of previous technology, and we did a deal many years ago with BT for them to use lampposts as part of what was then bleeding edge technology, which now looks, of course, completely historic. But that was a time-limited deal that is determined, and we know that we've got those assets back and available to be used for the new technology. And of course, we keep an asset register of those, and have made the usual due diligence to ensure that we haven't let them to somebody else and are available to enter into our contract. But as I mentioned earlier, there are other people who've got a different view about that, and they are, they're seeking to challenge that commercial arrangement, and that could be replicated elsewhere. But certainly, it's something we've got to resolve in Westminster.
Well, that's precisely the point that I made. You talked about there ought to be a register of what the boroughs are doing and borough assets, and some boroughs haven't done it, and this, that, and the other. Where it should be looked at very carefully. You see, I'm completely dumbfounded to think that any London borough, no matter how backward they might appear to be politically, but at least technologically, London boroughs absolutely ought to be at the cutting edge of this, and have a register of their assets. And I just cannot understand it. I recall some years ago, the assets which the city corporation had, relating to their hydropower, which was used here for the bridge and for lifts and things of that sort, provided a vast amount of ducting and cabling and things like that. What's happened to all of those things? And are there others which ought to be on a register but aren't?
So, just going back to the question of ownership of lampposts, we know that approximately 18 boroughs are in the position to fully own at the moment their own lampposts for discussions around joint working together. Others have leased their lampposts off in commercial arrangements with providers as part of cost-cutting measures, and some on connectivity measures. And there are, of course, some legal disagreements, as we've said, about that. There are, I think, approximately around 20,000 lampposts per borough. So this is a potentially large market, even if you're only looking at 18 boroughs. And of course, if lampposts were leased off to another provider, they of course would be in the game for these kind of technologies anyway, but just not working in concert. This kind of goes back to the question of lottie and working together with boroughs and how we do things more together. So, so these are all kind of quite live questions for us. On the question of asset registers, I have no doubt that every borough has an asset register, whether it's in a shareable form, whether it's been pointed in the direction of digital connectivity, whether people fully know the capability of the assets that they have, whether they know where the ducting is. That's a slightly different question. And so what we need boroughs to do is to look afresh at their assets with the lens of digital connectivity.
Can I just comment on that as well? It's not just boroughs that have assets that could be useful in this context. We had a very interesting presentation from the utilities companies, and they have very significant numbers of redundant assets which provide, in some cases, quite large tunnels going for quite long stretches within London. They have done quite a lot of work in terms of analysing what they've got, and I know that they are willing to share that with boroughs in order to look at being able to copy what's being done by TfL and to get fibre comparatively quickly and easily beneath streets without the need to dig them up.
And we've just won a bid from the Geospatial Commission to provide an underground asset register in central London, so we fully know what's underneath us, which is an immense benefit, of course, to connectivity and also construction projects, so you know where you're going.
Can now revert to what I've been told to ask questions about. but these sessions are quite pointless if they're not sort of interactive, and we pick up pick up stuff from you which we haven't known about before. And the point about technology and so on, your principal asset, TfL's principal asset, according to this thing here, relates to a technology which is long gone. When you talk about the ducting for trams, last tram ran more than half a century ago. I mean, it's quite extraordinary that should be here. But the question I've been tasked to ask you, Theo, is how are you ensuring that businesses have the skills to actually take on? There's no point in providing the technology if people haven't got the skills to take it on, and businesses haven't got the skills to take them on. So what are we doing?
I think there are a number of initiatives that the Mayor is undertaking. First of all, there's the Digital Talent Programme. It's launched, I think, 2015. A number of commitments that GLA has made to this. The Digital Talent Programme is a extremely important investment in underserved groups, working class, BAME, women, and that has been working with a range of new providers in order to get people apprenticeship ready and to boost entrepreneurial skills amongst young people. I think it's a really, really exciting, well-designed initiative, of which we're beginning to see some of the fruits. And of course, of particular concern for many in London is that Londoners are not left behind by technology. So we do need a strong focus on digital inclusion. And the devolution of the adult skills budget provides us a real opportunity to assist Londoners with low or no digital skills, and we'll be making an announcement in September on that provision for Londoners. I think that devolution gives us a really, really good opportunity to engage with the business community as well, not just in terms of their workers, but also in terms of their customers. Previously, with digital skills, there was money available from the government, but I don't think it was marketed very well, in the sense that if you marketed, I think the logic was if you marketed it well, then there was not enough resource to meet the demand. And I think we really need to look at how we work with the Citizens Advice Bureau and some of our large providers to identify people who could really benefit from better digital skills to make them more confident in the digital world. So that's a really, really big focus for later this year that the Mayor's asked me to look at.
There's a report only published today talking about the decline in ICT, number of students studying ICT at school. Presumably that has a knock-on effect, throughout the generations. Do you think that that's I appreciate it, I think it's Jules Pipe's responsibility, isn't it, the education budget which has been devolved to us here?
Well, and Joanne as well. So the previously, in my previous life, not just being a local councillor in Camden, I worked for UKI, which is a video games trade body, and we had a campaign called the Next Gen Skills Campaign, which convinced the government to change the curriculum and put coding onto the curriculum, so that kids from primary school age onwards had computing skills, not just basic ICT skills. So part of the Digital Talent Programme supports not just the students, but the teachers in enabling them to teach the new computing curriculum, and also supports them with pedagogy to teach the new curriculum in an exciting way, because I think for too long perhaps we taught ICT and commuting in a way that put some people off, appealed to others. So I think that investment is actually critically important in not just helping with the new curriculum, but also attracting people to take it up at each stage of the education cycle where they've got a choice.
But that, given that City Hall now has the FE budget, that clearly, you and whoever it is who's actually managing that for FE, this clearly will be an area where there is a connection between the two, and you shouldn't act inside it. Second question I've got, which seems to be kind of rhetorical, but gives you a chance to say how wonderful you are, and again it's to you, Theo, and it's a phrase, how do you think improvements to digital infrastructure will impact on London's competitiveness over the next decade? And I'm sure you're not going to say it's not going to have any effect, so...
I think I mentioned it before, that London is a city of convergence, that the number of specialist tech sectors that we have here have grown and are growing at the moment. Every day people seem to put tech at the end of a new word, kind of law tech and prop tech and things like that. And I think that it will be, it's absolutely fundamental for this city's growth. The number one concern that people have put to us as a city in relation to their business growth and this also applies critically to the public sector, is our ability to attract talent, to obviously have homegrown talent, which is the skills challenge, but also to attract talent from across the world. The idea being, if we're going to create world-class products, we need to have world-class teams and be able to assemble them. So that's one of our really fundamental challenges as a city, whether there was delayed Brexit or not. London has a real advantage, I think, in its brand across the world that we often see. There's a ranking system that happens at Davos, and London always, I think for the last 5 or 6 years, has come top, primarily because of its cultural offer, but as well as the track record that we have in innovation. So it's a great attractor for people. So I think we're kind of well placed for the future of this. In terms of my role, which is primarily around public service transformation, our job is to mobilise all of that for civic benefit. And we come from, I think, quite a good starting point. One, London has a great track record around data, the open data that was started in 2010 here, that we're looking to advance in the future. TfL's unified API, now in its 5th year, was an immense achievement, opening up all of that data so that a huge family of developers could develop really good cool applications for London. And it's like City Mapper, and have really transformed people's lives. So there is an interrelationship between the two, that the innovation that we do as a city also has a kind of knock-on effect.
Is there anybody snapping at your heels?
I think
my question is competitiveness.
Yeah, so it's a really good question. I think we're closer in kind of what we do to, I think, quite a lot of European cities. And so when I look to things that other cities are doing that I'd quite like us to do in the future, I see Amsterdam using, developing an open source platform, as have Paris, which have enabled them to lower costs and provide a range of applications, usually sort of quite simple but functional ones, but applications to citizens and to city government that have meant that they are less reliant on big, inflexible tech. And I think the direction of travel that I'd like to take us is to enable our city to have more capability to shape more things around the needs of our citizens and be less reliant on big tech. Big tech is, of course, necessary for many, many things, but it doesn't have to be overly dominant in our city services. So when I see things that I would like to emulate, I look to the work that Amsterdam is doing. There's some really good work also in Helsinki as well around...
They're sort of toy town compared to London.
Yeah, I mean, 650,000 people, yeah, that's true. But, you know, London, you know, we look at things both on a level of 9 million people and average borough size of 250,000, so...
Yes. Yeah, okay, I take that. Okay, I would have thought that was something that we should be looking at, really, you know, the open source. I'm of a generation which remembers when everybody was given an Acorn computer. And
I
you
remember
know,
them too. So
well, there you are. And I do wonder whether we ought not, you know, a new generation of things. You know, people obviously would charge for the use of it, but if the piece of hardware equipment was dished out, and that would be the real thing to popularise all of this. But maybe that's too future-proof. My third question, I think, has already been answered by Councillor Glanz, telling us how wonderful Westminster is, and you already have. Thank you, Chairman.
Well, I thought I should put that, how wonderful Westminster is, as my last question, showing my bias here anyway. Two other things I was going to ask Theo. One is, it's been touched on by Tony. Could you write to us with examples of what other cities are doing that you'd like to do ideally in the future?
Yep.
And the question I always ask, because I'm often told to by scrutiny, and by my party leadership actually, which is, how do you measure success?
So the Smart London Roadmap is actually published openly. So we've published that on an off-the-shelf project management toolkit called Trello. So we just have a Trello board, and it tells you what we're doing, what success we're measured on our 20 or so initiatives, when we've pivoted, because sometimes we're doing something and we realise that the hypothesis was wrong, and why. So we've published that openly, and I think one of the things is that why we did that was that when you talk about a smart city, it involves lots and lots of different things coming together, which is very confusing for practitioners and the public. So we felt we needed to be clear about our approach. So that is fundamentally how we hold ourselves accountable. Each of the measures will have their own success criteria, whether it's the Mayor's Civic Innovation Challenge, the work of the Connected London team, or indeed the metrics around the Mayor's Digital Talent Programme. But on a high level, how I measure success is our ability for our public services to be more responsive to the needs of citizens, how we use data as a city and how we mobilise that for civic benefit. That essentially is the goal of what we're trying to do here.
Thank you. Any final questions from colleagues? No? Well then, can I thank our guests for their attendance and very helpful contributions to the discussion. And can we agree to note the report and discussion and to delegate authority to me in consultation with the Deputy Chair to agree any output from the meeting and any additional activity to support our scrutiny investigation, please? Thank you. And can we note the remainder of the meeting dates in the 2019-20 Assembly year, that the topic for our next meeting in June will be a scrutiny review of the GLA culture team and place-based projects, and delegate authority to me in consultation with the Deputy Chair to agree the scope and terms of reference for that review, please.
Noted, Chair.
Thank you. And date of next meeting is Wednesday the 26th of June at 2 o'clock here in the Chamber. And finally, any other business? I have no urgent business, so I can close the meeting. Thank you very much, everybody, for attending.
Thank you.
Thank you.